All right, everyone, welcome back to Growers Not Showers, the best podcast this side of, I don't know, Mars. I don't know what episode we're on, maybe 10 or something, fuck knows. We're joined with a very special guest, Camille. No, I'm kidding. We've got Luke.
Very special indeed. Mr. Autism right by here, ready to go.
I guess because it's a guest episode, Luke, mate, we'll start off with you. So for people who don't know, because I mean your social media has been popping, especially recently, but yeah, give us like a run through of like yourself, background, what got you into gym, kind of all that good shit.
Okay, well, I was heartbroken, as most of us are when we first joined the gym, and I came across, unironically, one of Z's transformation videos and thought, I'm gonna do that. Went to the gym and just absolutely fell in love with it. Like my first session, I was like, holy shit, like I found my thing. This is my calling. But I'm 55 kilos at 6'3" and nobody's going to believe me. So I had a lot of work to do. I sort of didn't have any direction when leaving school. Even though I was intelligent, I wasn't particularly academic because I just didn't have anything that interested me. But then when I found bodybuilding and just the gym in general, I was like, okay, this is what I want to go do. So I went to study nutrition and exercise science, became a nutritionist, did my personal training course, and just things have just gone from there, really. And now I am being titled as a PD expert by some people, which isn't something that I'm willing to call myself at this point. But obviously, all three of us seem to have a common sort of ground here where we've had performance-enhancing drugs negatively impact the health of our sort of friends, and I wanted to make sure that I was in a position where, when it came to myself, clients, and anybody around me, I could give them good, solid advice that was going to keep them safe the best that I could in some way.
Nice, man. What got you into kind of coaching in particular? Because you referenced you went off and became a qualified nutritionist and PT, but what was the catalyst there? Was it just pure love for training or kind of anything else?
Well, at the time, one of my friends said, "Oh, you're pretty good at this. Have you ever thought about being a PT?" And I was just kind of like, "Oh yeah, there's an opportunity to make some money here, perhaps by going down this route." And it's never been sort of a scenario where I've been financially motivated. But at the end of the day, we do have to put a roof over our head and food on the table. So I just kind of figured, if this is the one thing that I've got a genuine interest in, then let's just kind of pursue it and just hope it goes somewhere.
Very nice, man. Very nice. So in terms of like recently, then I promise I'll stop with like the interview style questions.
Oh,
but in terms of like recently, we've seen, as you kind of referred to there, you've been like talking a lot about PEDs and about like giving informative stuff. And don't worry, we'll let you shout your Instagram out at the end. Is there anything in particular that you think like recently has been I guess something that you've maybe changed your mind on or kind of developed, or kind of like since you've started? I guess it'd be a good idea to kind of see, what things you think have changed, or maybe your own thought process in regards to coaching, other than just generally getting better. Is there anything that you've kind of done like a 180 on?
I would say sort of the biggest change over the last couple of years in particular has been kind of my approach to cycle design, length, and dosage. I, for the most part, during my time using PDs, had always erred on the side of caution, to the extent where I was using, 600 milligram per week sort of cycles. And for the most part, I thought at the time, oh, that's a large amount, because I thought like 1 gram was like crazy dosages. And in recent times, especially being out here in Thailand, where, we have access to pharmacy grade gear just by simply walking into the shop, and the bodybuilding scene out here kind of really opened my eyes to sort of the amount that people take, and for the duration as well. And while that definitely isn't something I want to promote and sort of glorify, it did also show me that we can do a lot to mitigate a lot of the side effects, even when using these higher dosage sort of cycles and approaches. And again, that has been sort of exacerbated almost by being here in Thailand, because I can walk in and get organ imaging done. So I know what my MRIs are, I know what my heart, liver, kidney health is looking like, and I can accurately sort of take XYZ and monitor it via same day blood readings and lab reports, etc. So I guess that's one area.
So not just to for anyone who's going to very selectively hear that answer, because there's going to be a lot of selective hearing in that, it's being comfortable with using more PDs with more safety measures in place alongside, essentially.
Absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so I think kind of opening things up a bit more broadly then, maybe I should have started with this. Fuck it. The podcast flows as it flows. How's your week been? Any kind of events this week? Anything like noteworthy outside of training as well, and bodybuilding and coaching?
Not really. No, I'm just pretty much in a position where I work as a coach and I go to the gym, and that is my life, and probably the same for both of you guys as well.
Yeah, Groundhog Day and repeat. To bring into the conversation as well, Camille, mate, how's your week been? Making things a bit more casual.
To be fair, we did record a pod 2 days ago, so it's only been 2 days since. But in those 2 days, interestingly, I'm a relatively new coach per se, so I haven't had any clients I've gone through prep yet. And I've had my first client come who said that they might want to do a prep, which is exciting stuff for me. Definitely something that is going to challenge my skill set a little bit more. But yeah, definitely looking forward to it.
Jeez, mate, that's exciting. That prep to stage or prep to shoot?
Prep to shoot for now. But we'll see. We'll see where the prep takes us, as you say. We don't want to put any labels on it pre the prep. Like, if we get to that stage and he's really fucking lean and he's like, oh yeah, like I want to go for a comp, we can do that. But I'm not going to put pressure on him. I just said, let's just prep for the sake of prepping, and we'll see where we get there.
My advice would be just double the dose. You'll be fine.
Anything you're taking, just double the dose. Yeah, we've got I've got 2 in prep at the minute. One who's 14 and 18 weeks out, and then one who is 9 weeks out. So we've got one who's doing 2 shows, one that's doing 1 show, and that's very exciting. It's quite the experience going through that with some like coaching someone through a prep is very much like you're kind of both in it together, which is quite a lot of fun. Whereas with like regular diet phases, it feels a bit more, not hands off, but it feels more like you're taking someone through the process. Whereas it feels like you're leading someone by the hand, whereas prep feels a bit more being hand in hand in a way, I think, because like I can understand when coaches are like, it's a very emotional process, which is, yeah, it definitely seems to be. And I know, speaking of preps, we've all vaguely kind of got some plans with like competing. I'm hopefully this year, 2025, going to step on stage. I know Camille, we're talking about, I think, like maybe like next year or something, aren't we?
Next year, March, I'm thinking.
Yeah. And then Luke, I know obviously you've kind of had a little bit of like some forward planning with preps. Maybe what are you thinking?
It's a difficult one because I was coming out of what I would consider a depression, right? And I sort of threw myself into my prep as a way to just sort of force myself back into normality and sort of fall in love with bodybuilding again. And I was really locked in for that prep, dieted down to 97 kilos, and at 5 weeks out I had an adductor injury, which meant the cardio was pretty much impossible, and I was in a pretty good place, but there was just a little bit of fat left on my glutes and stuff, and I'm not going to step on stage unless I am peeled. There is not going to be soggy glutes for me. It's not just something I'm willing to do. And I just kind of thought, right, look, I've got 5 to 6 weeks here where I've accepted that I'm going to be on PEDs, and a decent amount as well because it's a prep. What if I rebound during the 5 to 6 weeks, keep the PEDs in, remove the fat burners, and see what I can do? And it's gone pretty well. So
agreed, yeah, man, agreed.
I mean, I'm 120 kilos and I was 97, and sure, there's a bit of body fat gain, but it's been good weight so far. And now I just don't know what to do, because I'm thinking, do I diet and then go into an off season and really sort of capitalize on the progress I can make this year, or do I continue my health phase, which is going to happen anyway, which is what I'm in right now, and then just go back into another prep? I don't know. The skinny kid in me just always wants to be bigger, so constant mental battle there.
I'm a fan of, I think my philosophy towards preps has changed a lot just off the back of that. Like, I did a pre-prep diet, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 months ago now, and things were good. They were flying, and I should have just followed through to stage, but I was like, no, this was meant to be a pre-prep diet, kind of push back up very, very slightly and then pull down. This push up has been fucking productive. But I honestly think about the time I should have just seized the opportunity to prep, because when things are going so well, like when you're in a good rhythm and a good routine and things are just kind of moving, I think capitalize. It's very easy to like, and I've definitely done it, like postpone it and be like, okay, that last diet went very well, I'm sure the next one will too, and kind of assume. So I'd almost say like, it's hard to say forward planning, but if you still feel like you're in a pretty good spot, I would say almost like leverage that, get the prep done. You can always postpone a prep, whereas you can't just jump on stage. Do you know what I mean? Like you can't just go from mid off season or beginning of off season to just like bang, you're on stage in 8 weeks. I mean, you can, but like fuck. But I would say go in with a prep. You don't even need to announce it. Then if like finish off your health phase, then go into a prep, and then you can always just pull it if you see a reason not to. But I think particularly with coaching, it's difficult because you're kind of like, you're from a business standpoint, you're banking on having more clients and being busier the longer that you give it. But from a bodybuilding perspective, you're banking on still being able to give your full attention to that prep, if that makes sense. And I think that's been the biggest struggle for me, was balancing that workload. Like it's very easy to balance other things, but being there for your clients while also being there for yourself is very, very, very difficult, particularly with like clients who are going through more stressful things, and particularly with you, Luke, obviously, because you work with people who I imagine, based on what the content you put out, are using PEDs and probably have pretty high level questions, and you want to maintain an ability to manage that. And I'm sure you do, but obviously if diets go wrong and there's a shit ton of fatigue, or you're just getting quite beaten up quite badly by that diet, that does affect everyone's ability to kind of like convey themselves and coach to an extent. So I'd almost err on the side of like, health phase, go for the prep, see what happens, you know?
Yeah, it's a hard one to decide, especially at this point. But you know, one of my friends out here in Thailand, Vigorous Steve, which some of the
yeah, that's a name drop. Damn.
Yeah, he has never done a show himself, and he has made it clear it's just because to do so he would have to sacrifice so much of his time that it would be worth it from a business standpoint, and also the people he works with then would be suffering just for the sake of him getting a plastic trophy. And you know, I don't feel like I'm necessarily in the same place or mentality right now, but I definitely am starting to see more of that, because you know, one of the sort of attractions of doing a prepper course, as you said, is to, you know, have a positive impact on business. But I'm in a position right now, luckily, and you know, very gratefully, that I don't need that. So is it now just a case of me continuing to bodybuild just for the sake of loving it, continuing to do it in the way that I have done, which is by being sensible and making sure that I'm, you know, doing everything I can to remain healthy and safe, and just keeping it as a passion instead of as something I literally pursue as a sport, if we can call it that.
Yeah, I think a lot of coaches who there's like you know, Cal Raystrick, Cal Pro Coach. I know like that he talks about like he went to JP and he was like, I want to coach like high level bodybuilders, and JP was like, you have to get on stage, bro. You have to get on stage, otherwise they won't respect you. And the only reason he got on stage was literally just to coach bodybuilders. And I think if that's the main intention, if it's more for like a business standpoint, I think you'd be better off prepping someone else than you would be going through prep yourself, because you'll make clearer decisions and it shows greater ability and greater skill set. I think prepping yourself purely from the standpoint of like to be able to show people that you can prep would be not the wisest decision. So I can definitely see like Steve's thought process there. The appeal to prep for me is to do it, but equally if I get on stage and I hate it, I'm not going to force myself to do it. It's kind of like one of those things where like I'm bodybuilding, I want to experience that at least once. It appeals to me quite strongly, and so I think it's something I can see myself doing long term, but obviously we'll see like what happens. But I think there's a bit of a kind of pressure, I think, on coaches to feel like they have to prep themselves, and I think you'd honestly be better off by saying like, hey, look, I'll prep someone. Like if you come to me, I'll prep you for a reduced cost or a reduced fee. Or if you've got a client who really wants to prep, just sitting them down and saying like, hey, let's do this together. And you can kind of do like what me and Camille did and start off by like photo shoot prepping people and then moving to beyond that. But I'd say I'd always like, I mean, Joe Jeffrey's like, you know, a very well respected coach, and he's never himself got on stage. And it's pretty clear he can still get athletes on stage. Obviously, there's some controversy to his name, but it's clear he can get athletes on stage. So yeah, I think if it's purely from like a business standpoint, it's almost like if you feel the itch to prep, I'd say go for it. But if it's like purely business, yeah, I don't really see like a huge need to. If that makes sense.
I mean, I've always had the sort of mindset of a doctor doesn't need to have a disease in order to know how to cure it.
Yeah.
And I've always kind of felt like that was the case with sort of bodybuilding. And you know, somebody recently who described it as kind of like the difference between being a NASCAR driver and a NASCAR engineer. It's like the driver doesn't need to know how the intricacies of the engine works; they just need to know how to press the buttons and pedals, steer the wheel, etc. So I do feel like there is definite merit in having real world experience and sort of knowing the literal struggles that the client will go through from a mental, emotional, physical standpoint, etc. But ultimately, if you know how the human body works and you know how to manage the variables and you know how to manage people as well and their emotions and temperament, like you can be a very successful prep coach without ever having to do it yourself. I don't think it's a mandatory requirement.
Again, it comes down to like just doing what appeals to you. I think there's too many things in bodybuilding that people force themselves into, and that's not necessarily the right way of doing things. Like bodybuilding really is a work of passion. Like, you know, to go through like the intensive training, the diet, the lifestyle, particularly like the diet on either end, very high food, very low food, whatever it is, and just the amount of time that you have to give, particularly the longer you get into bodybuilding, the more that you have to give to it, and the more it kind of controls everything that you do. I think you can't, it's like people who hate following a structured meal plan or structured food, trying to force themselves to bodybuild, or people who hate training with intensity, trying to force themselves to bodybuild. It's like, you need to follow what you enjoy about what you're doing. And I think if prep is a part of that process that you enjoy, fucking go for it. But if it's not, like you said, there's no point doing it, particularly if like, yeah, if the goal of the prep is just to prove to people that you can prep, yeah, I don't think there's too much merit. I think it's good to be able to diet. I think it's good to be able to show that you can diet. But I think from your perspective, Luke, like you've definitely shown that you could diet. You could have landed on stage. So if you're sat there thinking like, the only reason I'd prep is just kind of like, I don't know, to prove that I can do it or like to get more prep clients, I think it's not worth it. But if you catch that itch of like the idea of prep is exciting or you'd like to do it, that's when I think you should do it. And I think that's when prep doesn't take away from your life too much, because it's almost like this thing that you're working towards and enjoying rather than feeling restricted and bound to it, which I think people kind of lock themselves into.
Yeah, I think prep for me really locked me into bodybuilding, but competitive side of it itself, I don't know, because I am somebody that ultimately is quite introverted. I am somebody who is probably one of those stereotypical bodybuilders that just struggles with self-esteem issues, and that's why we got into this in the first place. So, you know, the thought of me getting up on stage and, you know, standing in front of all those people, I can't say fills me with the feeling of, wow, yeah, I really want to do that. But due to that sort of lack of self-confidence and sort of where that comes from through sort of my teenage years, I have that sort of underdog mentality where I really want to prove people wrong just out of spite. So there's that part of me that is like, maybe I can do it just to ruin someone's day.
Well, I think even that's a valid reason. I think part of the appeal for me is like a true showcase of like what you've got. It kind of like, I enjoy the cycle of bodybuilding, of like gaining and then losing, but I feel like prep gives a real definitive kind of like, this is the milestone. Do you know what I mean? Otherwise it's very similar. And I think like kind of dieting down to be like, I'm dieting down, I'm peaking, I'm getting on stage, I'm presenting myself, this is kind of where I'm at currently. It almost gives like a good insight, but you could probably get a similar, I mean, you can get a similar effect from like dieting to the same rough level of condition, checking your caliper sites to be like, is it roughly the same, or dieting to the same body weight and watching it over time get leaner and leaner, or just like dieting for a photo shoot. So I think, again, there's different reasons to prep. Like, I think prep, to be fair, like it's never going to be a thing that you hugely love the process of, but as long as you have a good enough reason, like Steve clearly, like, I think he's correct in saying like, if the only reason he would do it would be like, if it's not really appealing and it's just from a business standpoint, like, yeah, he's already got business covered, he's chilling. But if it's from a like, I want to prove myself, if it's from I want to shut some fucking mouths up, if it's from like to try it, or if it's from like I really want to showcase what I've built, then yeah, fucking, you know, go for it. But I think too many people have the idea of like, they force themselves into a prep rather than kind of letting it find them. Like the next time you diet, just kind of see where you land. Like, are you doing well? Do you feel all right? Do you feel like you want to jump on stage? If you do, cool. If you don't, don't. There's too much like forward planning. And unless you're going for a pro card, there's no need to forward plan. Like if you're going for a local show or a national show, you don't really need to forward plan. Like they're running all the fucking time, you know. Would you compete over in Thailand then? I think you were planning to before.
Yeah, so I was going to do the PCA Chiang Mai. There's actually, you know, a pretty competitive PCA scene out here. I must admit, I don't feel like the level of competition is as high as back in the UK. I believe that out here in Thailand, that there aren't many good sources of information for the Thai people, because a lot of the information we get obviously is in English. So we can learn from people like Steve, like John Jewett, like all of these really knowledgeable people, because we understand it. There isn't a Thai John Jewett. So the competitors aren't as knowledgeable and up to date on sort of the modern literature and processes and methods. So I just feel like they're stuck behind a little bit because they just don't have access to the same information. And I find that the condition out here lacks slightly, but there are some really good bodybuilders. On average, it's lacking a little bit of conditioning. So
I've coached a few clients from like other countries. And there's certain countries like the two that kind of jump to my head are India and the Philippines, where the advice that those PTs give my clients is crazy, like genuinely baffling. And you're like, that's just the complete opposite of how that works. I think the most common one is usually still people saying like, you need to rotate your exercises, you need to shock the muscle. And I kind of be like, that's not really how muscle growth occurs. Like that's like learning to play golf and then you suddenly start playing badminton. Like, what the fuck are you doing? You're not improving at the thing you were doing. You're just doing something new. And yeah, you might get better at it quite quickly, but that's just because it's new. And then you swap back to something that you, again, suck at for a little bit. You get back to where you were and then you swap to something else. But some of the advice around like eating or training is crazy. I can't imagine the advice about PEDs the clients have had out of those countries weren't enhanced. So I can't imagine what the PED advice is, but I imagine I can take some good guesses. You know, kickstarting cycles, orals. Yeah,
some of the medication you can't necessarily get in the pharmacies if it's just generally not prescribed anymore. So one of them, for example, I was on prep was Clen. So I asked my friend to get me some Clen, and he's in the gym. He's giving it to me, and he's like, he's Thai and he's telling me how to use it. He's like, right, so you want to take X amount for 1 week, then you want to stop.
No,
I'm like, oh, we're not doing this, are we? But with like language barrier, like he understands English enough for me to communicate in sort of like general conversations. But I can't sort of, you know, tell him the pharmacokinetics of clenbuterol and sort of how we would, you know, use this. So I'm just like there. The Clen's in my hand, he's got the other side, and I'm pulling, and I'm like, please just give it to me so I can walk away. And he's like pulling me closer, trying to tell me more, and I'm like, I need to leave.
Yeah, Jesus, man. Cleanse cycling seems to be one that I see quite it's quite prevalent. I had a lot of people when I was in Wales, I had a lot of people talking about cleanse cycling. A lot of people who would go to the gym would take Clen and cycle Clen quite frequently, which is really weird. Like I don't really know where that fucking comes from, but
I do. Here's my autism kicking in. You ready for this?
Go on, go on.
The studies that were originally done on clenbuterol showed that after 2 weeks in horses, the adaptation to metabolic rate actually dropped off. So after 2 weeks, they didn't lose any more body fat. So people, I think, have taken those studies and gone, after 2 weeks, it stops burning fat. We need to take some time off. But that's in horses. It doesn't have the same sort of effect in humans because, surprisingly, we aren't horses.
I literally had I think animal studies skew. I don't think I was thinking about this morning. Animal studies are great when you don't have human studies because they give you an inkling of maybe what could happen. But I don't think people realize how big of a divide there is. Just because you test on a mammal doesn't mean that you have humans. Like Luke, you saw the beef I got into yesterday about seed oils and linoleic acid, proper nutritional nerdy shit. And some guy sent me a study that was done on mice that was like, hey, if they have a diet that's 8% linoleic acid, which is a common thing that people cite as being problematic from seed oils, they start growing tumors. I was like, okay, well, how many mice was that done on? 12. Okay, interesting. And then 1992. So I found him one from 2017, meta-analysis, 300,000 human beings, up to a diet of 80% linoleic acid, 0 health defects. I'm like, it's really interesting that happens in mice, but we're not dealing with mice. And we have so much data around people that just disqualifies it. And I think when people are still quoting animal studies or animal-based studies, when we have human studies, and we understand that even like if you like learn about clen, through what mechanism of action is that happening? Why would after 2 weeks clen suddenly stop increasing or start to plateau your basal metabolic rate? It just wouldn't. And so when we don't have any human studies that back it, when we don't see that anecdotally at all, we see the complete opposite. And mechanistically, we can't explain theoretically why that would happen. You just have to go, okay, I just don't think it's happening. You know, but people still dig up these old studies and be like, bang.
Yeah, and a lot of people do rely on the studies too much. I keep getting sort of painted as this like science-based evidence based lifter / coach, and I'm like, hang on, I'm not a nerd like you guys, right? I'm somewhere in the middle. And I think that's ultimately where people should be, because they should be looking at some of the anecdotal evidence. Like, you look at the great physiques over the last 30, 40 years, clearly they were doing something right. There has to be something within their formula that is working. And if we look at the studies, sure, we can get a better understanding of how these things may be working and how they could contribute towards the results that we want. But I feel like the truth is always going to be somewhere in between those for the most part. Not in maybe a literal sense, but I think if people are being too dogmatic one way or the other, then they're just being ignorant then to the other side. Like there's right and wrong both sides there. And I think the best approach people can take is kind of trying to find like a middle ground between the two and not being completely dogmatic one way or the other. One way or the other.
I like John Jewett talks a lot about this. To name drop John Jewett, he says you shouldn't be entirely science based. You should have a scientific approach, and the scientific approach is make this change, implement this idea. What do we observe from this person? Does it work for them? Does it not work for them? Then we go back to the drawing board and we go, this is working great. Cool. Leave it. This isn't working great. Okay. Change it. Why could that be? Having greater knowledge is great, but you don't then need to make everyone's training stupidly high volume, lengthened partials. You don't need to be scared of a barbell. But I think I agree. Like it's gone so far the other way of people like, I have certain movements that I set up deliberately not fully lengthened because it just feels nicer on my joints. And I've had people stop me in the gym and be like, your face away cable curl, you could set that more lengthened. And I'm like, yes. And they're like, why don't you? And I'm like, because it hurts. It hurts for me to do that. And they're like, okay, but it's more muscle growth. I'm like, for how much longer? Like if I get bicep tendonitis, which I've got at the minute, like how many sets of biceps am I going to miss out on by rehabbing that? And that's the thing. Sometimes you just have to go, okay, I understand this theory. I don't need to always implement that. Or saying, okay, for this person, I can see that currently what we're observing is working. There are no downsides. I can maybe make some inferences as to why that's working, but what we see working, we're going to rinse and repeat. There's no reason to go, nah, your back's growing off a barbell bent over row. It would grow more off a lengthened partial. Like, you just can't say that.
Do you know what? I've never had sort of anybody come up to me in the gym and try and give me unsolicited advice like that was bigger or stronger than me. And I think it's because the people who are truly big and strong understand that there is no sort of one way to skin a cat here. It's like people are going to have individual variants. So there are differences in how people train, set up, movements, whatever the case may be. It's always the 70 kilo pure gym PTs.
The good thing about knowing a lot is it allows you to problem solve, but I think people problem solve when there aren't issues. Like when people come up to me and try and correct my bicep exercise, but my biceps are growing just fine off of this. Thank you for your concern. Like there is no problem here, so we don't need a solution. But if you end up with, like I was training with a guy, Cam, this is not Cam's Fitness, this is fucking Cam, I forget your fucking, I think it's Cam Long, Cam, sorry. we were training together. We were doing his upper session, and he was like, "Oh, this back exercise, I just cannot progress to save my life." And I was like, "Okay, well, that's because if I'm taking a stab at it, this back exercise that you've got near the back end of your session is very contraction focused. I'd rather you did that at the start, and the other one that you're doing that's more lengthen focused, do it here." He gave it a run. It's been a few weeks, and now he's able to progress. And I'm like, "Cool." There was an issue, so we took a step further. We looked into it, and we gave a solution. But if he'd have said, "Hey, I'm doing a contraction focused row after I do my lengthened work," is that an issue? I'd be like, "Well, are you progressing it?" Yes. Okay, then fine. Like, you're cool. It's good to be aware of these things, but it doesn't mean you need to implement it. I think people do a similar thing with food. They'll be like, "Oh, don't drink whey, it will give you acne." It's like, well, let's see if that develops. Like, if you drink whey and you don't get acne, removing whey because of acne concerns is pointless. Like, just go and do it. You're fine. People provide the solution before there's a problem, and it's just pointless.
That's true. My advice to Cam would have been double the dose. There's a theme here somewhere.
To be fair, yeah, should have gone for pharma grade or something. Damn. I did want to obviously, because you are Mr. PD expert, the most knowledgeable man on earth with PDs. What I wanted to do is because I want to try and keep this podcast, like, to some degree educational for someone somewhere, who knows. So I think it'd be fun to run through maybe like the 3 common mistake, or maybe not so common, but 3 PD mistakes that just absolutely boil your piss and you can't stand seeing them.
Right. Talk about putting the man on the spot. So
I know, right?
It's a difficult one to answer because I see things on a daily basis now, especially with my Instagram page growing, where I just, if I had hair, I'd be pulling it out. I think the obvious one is that people are just taking way too much and just the wrong drugs. Like, actually, that's a good one. People don't seem to understand that over time, all androgens pretty much build muscle at the same rate. And that's not in a literal sense, but if we consider sort of the side effect profiles of certain drugs like Trembolo, it's like you can't run 300 milligrams of Tren for 6 months, but you could probably run 500 milligrams of testosterone for 6 months. So over a 6-month period, who's going to get the most growth long term with the least amount of detrimental, sort of side effects? And people just seem to always be looking for the designer drug. Like, at the moment, people keep asking me, "What's your thought on DHB?" And I'm like, "Well, it's a metabolite of equipoise. Aside from that, who gives a fuck? Like, just take your test, take your primo, shut up, eat your food, train hard, and sleep." And then the other one then is like mint and things like this. And it's like, I really think people are just always, and they probably always will still be looking for the magic secret, and it just isn't there. And I think when that sort of thinking is being applied to drugs, which can have a very detrimental impact on your health, I think that's where it really becomes sort of a danger zone.
I feel like there's a bit of bodybuilders like side effects in a way. Like, they'll be like, "Oh, my GH is real because my hands are tingly. This Tren is really, really making me grow, bro, because I feel fucking awful." I think there's some people are looking for like validation in the side effects. That's why you hear people talk about like Primo and Mast being so poor for muscle building, is what people would say traditionally, and it's because they do tend to give, on the surface of it, depends how much you take, very minimal side effects. And I think people often do, they are looking for like something that almost like fucks them up a little bit or makes them feel something.
Yeah, it's kind of like people with pre-workouts. They're taking 2 scoops to go into the gym. You feel like they're 2 pills deep in a drum and bass festival, and it's like really training as hard as you could be. Do you know what I mean? Like, because of that, is there an element now that's actually making you lose focus? Like, I don't know. People are just strange. Just human beings in general, strange creatures.
I think particularly bodybuilders, we tend to be. It's weird. Like, I feel like bodybuilders have a weird habit of being like, "I will take any drug," but then when it comes to health, be like, "I don't want to take any drugs." It's very fucking bizarre. The like dichotomy, like their stack will be this big, and you'll be like, "Okay, what are you doing to offset that?" And it's like, "I eat 1 vegetable meal a week." Like, cool.
I think actually that sort of brings up another point. If you were asking for 3, it's the sort of mindset that people have around growth hormone and insulin, thinking that they are advanced compounds in bodybuilding. It's actually the complete opposite as far as I'm concerned. Let's say we have a beginner and they've used 300 milligrams of testosterone and they want now to add something in that is going to give them a sort of bigger return on investment. What can we do? Well, we could take testosterone up to 500, so now we're increasing our androgen load by 200 milligrams a week, or we could put 3 IUs of growth hormone in and keep the testosterone at 300 milligrams. 3 IUs of growth hormone isn't going to cause any detrimental side effects. Like, we know that the sort of increase in fasted blood glucose from growth hormone is transient, and if we look at HbA1c levels, they remain unchanged. So why would we add in an extra 200 milligrams if we could use something like growth hormone that is going to cause us no issues at all?
Yep.
It's just sort of this outdated thinking, I think, from bodybuilders just being passed along the grapevine, isn't it?
Yeah, again, it's that I think people don't want to appreciate that, like, stack design is fairly easy to put together. And it's not, unless you have like issues with metabolizing certain drugs or certain health markers, but for the most part there's just going to be certain drugs where like you're just not really ever going to be touching them.
And I mean, to just touch upon the insulin there, because somebody might be listening thinking, oh wow, he said insulin isn't like an advanced sort of bodybuilding compound. It's like, if we look at sort of the fear around insulin, especially like Lantus, a basal insulin, it's like you're not getting peaks and troughs in sort of blood sugar levels. It's helping regulate across a 24-hour period for the most part. Like, I've taken Lantus to go and to do my sort of fasted cardio, thinking, okay, I'm going to have a meal in X amount of hours time. But if something has happened, I've then been in a fasted state for like 5 hours, and I've never experienced the hypo. And I think, a good sort of example of where this is sort of over exaggerated is, as a percentage, people who try and kill themselves with insulin, how many people actually succeed out of 100? Like, what's the percentage? You tried to kill yourself with insulin.
Well, are we talking like, if they're trying, they're going to use Nova Rapid, surely?
And just as a whole,
I don't know, like, fucking, all right, I reckon of people who try, I bet half succeed, but I know you're going to say it's way lower.
2%.
2%?
Yeah.
How do you measure that? Like, how do you measure people trying to kill themselves with insulin?
So apparently it was just based off how many people were admitted into the emergency room having deliberately overdosed on insulin, and the actual sort of mortality rates of the number of people that were admitted to the emergency room.
So what, they were just submitted with like very severe hypo?
Yeah. So, I mean, the fact they were surviving long enough to even get there in the first place, you know what I mean? Like, I think a lot of the fear around insulin comes from the fact that people were sort of misdosing their insulin because they were using, insulin syringes, and thinking that the marks on the side were in relation to IUs, but it's not. It's in mils, isn't it? So it's like when you go up to 1 on that syringe, that's not 1 IU. So people were just accidentally taking 5 times the amount that they were supposed to, and that's where the fear comes from. Am I saying that somebody listening to this now should go and take insulin? Absolutely not. But I'm saying, if you are under the supervision of a coach and knows what they're doing, you're willing to accept a certain level of risk, I believe that it makes more sense to administer growth hormone and, a basal insulin potentially a lot earlier than taking androgen load up. Because I think for the most part, it's going to...
Sorry, go on.
That was it. You can interrupt.
Sorry. With something like a basal insulin, and you mentioned like growth hormone, would you add basal insulin? Would you say that there's any anabolic properties to adding in something like that, or is it purely from a prophylactic standpoint, or what would you say? Because a lot of people view basal insulin in particular as more of a prophylactic than as a direct anabolic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has merit to both. I mean, if we're sort of considering the prophylactic side of things, I think for the most part, like, metformin is going to be better potentially, simply because, like, if we look at when we want to administer growth hormone, it's meant to be administered as a bolus dose in the evening before bed, right? People who are splitting it up throughout the day, in my opinion, just not really using it in the way that it's meant to be used. And if we think about the pharmaceutical companies, when they sort of, do the studies and say this is how it's supposed to be administered, they don't care if you're having to take multiple injections per day. If that was the best way to do it, they would just say take multiple injections per day. They don't care. So I believe that if that's the instruction and the studies show that we get a higher sort of excretion and output of IGF as a result of that, let's just listen to the people who are probably smarter than us and do that. And So with that being said, like I think that metformin, I've completely lost where I was going there.
So insulin as an anabolic as well as a prophylactic.
Oh yeah, so as a prophylactic, sorry, I believe that metformin is probably going to be better, because if we're taking it before bedtime, that's where I was going. Then we can sort of combine that with metformin, and then we sort of remove the implications in regard to increases in fasted blood glucose levels. When it comes then to using Lantus kind of as a means to accumulate more tissue over time, I definitely think there's merit there, but I think it's definitely exaggerated. While it's going to allow us to, for the most part, eat more food and partition those nutrients to a greater degree, which I think is going to have an indirect to muscle tissue over time, it's not the sort of be all and end all that some people make it out to be.
Okay. Interesting. And what about with insulin? You mentioned kind of it being something that you wouldn't necessarily, trying to phrase this correctly, you wouldn't shy away from with beginners. Is that both basal and fast acting, or is there one that you would implement before the other?
So I wouldn't be recommending that a beginner was going insulin aspart, so Nova Rapid and fast acting and stuff like that. I think if we can sort of administer like 10 IUs of a basal insulin instead of adding 200 milligrams of total androgen load alongside some growth hormone, I think the results are going to be better over a 3 to 6 month period, and again, just less impactful on side effects.
Nice. And then final question for you as a bit of a follow-up as well, because a lot of people ask, I know it's a horrible question to answer as well, so feel free to just say no, but at what point would you know, or would you be comfortable with adding in something else, or increasing someone's exposure to performance enhancers? Obviously, you'd be more readily happy to, let's say we have that 300 test example, you're looking at, okay, next steps are GH and Slim. At what point would you add those in? And then at what point would you say you would add in more androgens? And how do you, I know that's not going to be X weeks, it's going to be more of a thought process, but what's that thought process look like for you? Just so people can kind of maybe hopefully apply it somewhat reasonably at home.
So there's a lot of talk about the minimum effective dosing, and I believe that, yeah, we should try and get the most out of the least. But I do believe that the minimum effective dose changes depending on the goal. And I know and have friends that have high aspirations within bodybuilding, Max, if you're watching this, that are using the minimum effective dose. And it's like, you're not going to maximize your results by using the minimum effective dose. So if we're trying to get in shape for, Ibiza versus becoming a pro bodybuilder, the minimum effective dose of those two goals then is going to change. So while I am going to always try and err on the side of caution, if a client comes to me with a goal that requires us to increase androgens in order to get that result, then that sort of conversation we need to have and sort of assess the risk involved, and come to a decision of, is this something that we want to go for? So ultimately, a lot of the time when it comes down to increasing androgen load with my clients, it's a conversation that we have. It's something that I'm not going to let them dictate, but it's also something that I don't want to just come up and say, okay, we're doing this now, we're adding X in and going from there. Granted, some clients will say, oh, well, I want you to be in complete control, but I still prefer to sit down with the client and be like, okay, based off your goals and sort of your rate of progress and your health markers and everything else, this is what I believe would be the best sort of course of action for us, and we go from there. The thing is, coaching is so individual that it's very hard to answer a question like this, but I think it ultimately boils down to, I would do it when it's needed.
I mean, it's a good answer. It's the correct answer, I'd say. So fair enough.
And that doesn't necessarily mean need as in like we've maxed out progress because we've used X amount for X amount of time. The need could just be like, okay, we have a goal now that requires this. So the need is.
I think that's a common misunderstanding is people talk about like, oh, you, I don't know how to phrase it. Maybe like you are taking gear wrong because you didn't maximize your natural potential. It's kind of like, wow, if we took that idea, then you'd be jumping on gear at what, like 37, 35, maybe something like that. And it's like, that's kind of too late if you're already aware of anabolics and you know that you're going to take anabolics and you are happy with that lifestyle and that consequence and what could come about. That's definitely too late if your goals are to be like competitive in an enhanced realm. And equally then, if that was the case, you'd almost never escalate dosages because you can make a very good point of staying on a dose for years to maximize it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like I said, the minimum effective dose is dependent on the goal, isn't it? And
Yeah.
don't get me started on the whole like waiting till you're sort of at your genetic peak or max, because does that even exist?
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
what does that look like when you're in your 30s and you're natural and you've been training for ages, like late 30s, I should clarify, and you're gaining like, you've been training for 20 years, you're gaining like 1/4 pound of muscle a year, bro, you're still going, you're not plateaued, like I gain 1 rep every 6 months, that's still progress. It's like, at what point,
There's the question then of, even do you have to gain extra muscle to even improve, right? Like if your look is better, then that's still progress, even if it isn't actually adding any extra tissue in.
Yeah. Exactly. So I'm trying not to encourage people to start drugs young.
Double the dose now.
Triple the dose if you're listening. And I liked as well the post that you made kind of on a tangent about people starting off with testosterone far too low, to the point where they're starting someone off at like effective TRT as like a first exposure to anabolics, which is very funny.
Yeah, like I have a client that started working with me, and his coach had him on 75 milligrams of test and 75 milligrams of pre-pro. And then I am like, right, double the dose.
Yeah,
seriously, this time, double the dose.
Yeah, there is a certain, particularly with testosterone, there's a certain element of like, okay, you need enough to actually be enhanced. Because if you're going to take that risk or just that, what's the word? Burden of having to pin yourself with testosterone to replace natural healthy production, unless you're like hypogonadal, in which case, yeah, sure. But if the goal is not to be TRT, then actually take a dose that isn't TRT. Then once you're in a place of being super physiological, that's when it makes sense to like tiptoe. But I think people tiptoe a little bit too early, and like, 100 milligrams of testosterone, and we'll run that for a year, and then 200 and run that for a year, and it's like, bro, you're just gonna be TRT for 2 years at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately deciding to go on steroids and change your entire sort of biochemistry and endocrine profile is a big decision. So if you're gonna do it, fucking do it. Like, do it. Don't dip your toes in and just mess around with these tiny little cycles and then just go, okay, I'm gonna do PCT now and just go about my business. It's like, if that was your intention in the first place, then just stay natural the entire time. That doesn't mean if you're gonna use steroids, then use large dosages. What it means is, if you are going to make the decision to become enhanced, then you should do so because your intention is to bodybuild and take it seriously long term, which means that you are going to eventually expose yourself to these higher level of androgens, and it's a risk that you are willing to take because it's your passion or your job or something similar. So still take your time, get the most out of the least in sort of that regard. But if your intention, again, is just to dip your toes in, do 150 milligrams of test, just mess about with some Anavar, and then go to Ibiza, and then that's that. It's like, just stay natural.
Yeah, exactly. You want to be using that. It comes down to minimum effective dose again. If you're going under the minimum effective dose and you're using like the maintenance dose, almost, it's pointless. But you want to make sure that you are using minimum effective dose for your goals. But that still means that's still greater than a certain amount. Just using, injecting 100 milligrams of test every month is not going to be enough. You are going to have to use a certain amount. But equally, it's not using the maximally effective dose or just a maximal dose that you can afford, because that equally is not smart, because again, it comes down to what your goals are, and there's a certain element of longevity, but there's also a certain element of you're enhanced, what the fuck are you doing not being enhanced?
Yeah, I think some of this stems from the fact that people who are within sort of the public eye, such as influencers and top level coaches, kind of feel like they have a duty to sort of promote the minimum effective approach, because they're giving like a blanket statement to their followers. So they're saying, oh, these really conservative amounts. But I think in actuality, that isn't,
that's like 700 or 500 that they're referring to, not like 200 or, I think when people say conservative amount, they just mean don't take 5 or 6 grams. That's way too much. But
don't take more than you need. That's what
exactly. Yeah.
How much you need isn't going to be, this static amount of 300 milligrams per week.
Yeah, not forever. It will be at some point, but yeah, not forever.
I mean, my first cycle was off the back of watching a TM Cycles video. So, he was still living with, I say still living with his mom, like he was like 20 or something at this point. So, that's fine. I don't mean this as an insult, but like it was just in his mom's house, like back in the day, and he's there like,
That's
right, start off
crazy.
with 500 milligrams of test. So I'm there at uni, like in my dorm room with like my pen and paper. I started 500 milligrams of test. Granted, it didn't do anything for me. Do you want to know why? Because I didn't know how to train, eat, or recover properly. And that is one thing the majority of people miss. And I'm glad then that I came off and had sort of like a couple of years where I wasn't using, because ultimately when I did go back to it, then I did actually know how to train, eat, and recover. So the results were what I wanted. But people out there thinking that it's just a matter of take this drug and this drug, wait X amount of time, and you get the results. It's like, if that was the case, everybody would be in amazing shape, because the majority of people, male gym goers in the UK, are taking some form of performance enhancement, but only a very small minority of people actually look as if they even train. So
Yeah, I remember the first few months of my enhanced journey were pretty poor, and it took Liam sitting me down to be like, sort your shit out because you are not growing, for me to be like, oh, fuck, okay. There definitely was a little bit of like, I was at uni, I was coming back off a diet, my hunger was crazy, and I was like, oh well, I'm enhanced, so I just kind of like eat the fucking moon, and my training was just very fine. Like there wasn't a lot of intention behind it. I was just kind of like passively letting it go up a little bit. And yeah, the first few months that I was on was like kind of wasted time. And then I think it was like 3 months after that, I made about twice the progress that I'd made in like 6 months, just from like still following the old things that I had in place. And I think that's what people don't realize is like, I use the analogy of like, it's like multiplication. If you're multiplying 0, doesn't matter how big of a number you multiply it by, it's still going to fucking come out 0. But the higher your baseline is and the better of a bodybuilder or athlete you are, the higher that's going to be. I want to end on one more question as well.
Okay. I was just going to ask one first.
Oh, go on.
How old are both of you?
How old was I?
How old are both of you at the moment?
Oh, how old am I? I'm 23, mate. Just turned.
I'm 21.
Oh, see, kids. Literally, I'm a fossil over here at 31, right? And the point I was going to make there was, back, when I first started this, like there was no information out there. Like Instagram wasn't even like an app that people really use, and if they did, it was just like taking photos of their pets. TikTok didn't exist. Like, YouTube was just a completely different place. All you had was, forums where people were just spreading more and more misinformation. So, to anybody listening to this right now, like, you have a wealth of knowledge about performance enhancement, training, nutrition, everything right in front of you. Make the most of it. Just make sure that you are learning from the right sources, and it will save you years of trial and error. And when it comes to performance enhancing drugs, like, your health will thank you as well.
Yeah, I think that's the danger, is almost, oh fuck, I talk about this every episode, but this like half education of people vaguely learn one thing, kind of like the Clen study there. I can imagine someone hearing about that Clen study being like, oh, that's knowledge that I've learned, and then applying that, and it's like you've half learned a topic, like you've kind of learned something, but what you're learned is not quite right. And I think it's what people do with like science-based lifting or evidence-based lifting, whatever you want to call it, where they see, oh, here was a study, the outcome of that study was this, so I'm going to universally apply that. And it's like, well, mechanistically, that doesn't really make too much sense. And also there are other things at play here. And like, can we tear this study down a little bit? And what about, if you want to get into studies, what about all these other studies that don't quite agree? And like, I think that's where the danger is nowadays, is of people, because of things like TikTok and certain influencers like, do you know Toji?
I'm familiar. I mean, I watched the Transparent podcast with Niall. I'm not going to try to say his second name, because it's, if you know his surname, it's very easy to get wrong, and it sounds like a word we shouldn't say. I think it's on there, and I watch sort of all of those podcasts. So I think, I know the guy.
Yeah, there's certain like, there's still some certain like people spreading things that are kind of like pseudoscientific, of like, tren is the most anabolic and you should take it because XYZ, or like, don't take testosterone lower than a gram because XYZ, and like people kind of put some vague some vague like scientific terminology into things, and kind of like, I think there's a bit of a danger of like people misunderstanding. But anyway, I could waffle on. I want to hear, right, is there one thing, because obviously you've said like the UK scene for bodybuilding and coaching is fairly well informed, and I do agree, but is there anything within the UK scene, or within things that are generally more accepted as like, this seems to be true within PEDs in particular, that you disagree with, or you think people are maybe a little bit too absolute with? Is there anything in the current kind of space that's accepted that you're not a fan of?
Okay, so one thing that comes to mind, and I'll thank the Physique Collective for this, I want everybody to know that you can take something other than test and primo at 300 milligrams. Because all of the UK is just test primo, and it's like they're all just repeating the same thing, and it's like, yep, those two things definitely serve their purpose and have their application. But while I think in many cases there's an argument to be made for things like testing the DHT, like there are other things as well. You don't have to just repeat the same thing and expect a different outcome. Yeah, that's one of them.
Yeah, I agree. I remember we spoke a long time ago when I first started getting into anabolics, and I remember being like, AIs are bad, and you were like, that's not correct. And I remember I look back now and I cringe at me hating on AIs, and that's definitely a bit of a DHT fanboy that a lot of people push. A lot of people love DHTs.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen plenty of blood work of people using like a gram of testosterone with, aromazine to control their estrogen, and you should see their blood work. It's so good. Like, you wouldn't look at it and think this person is using a gram of total anabolic, mainly because testosterone is bioidentical hormone and it's very well tolerated. But, again, when we look at aromatase inhibitors and, selective estrogen receptor modulators, when they're used in clinical practice, they are used to treat breast cancer. So the goal is to put estrogen to zero to minimize the chance of those cells, essentially being fed and being able to, spread, right? So on the listed, side effects, it's, terrible changes to lipid values, muscle aches, weaknesses, etc. It's like, yes, but that is the side effect of the chronically low estrogen that you are now creating, rather than the acute sort of side effect of the drug in question. So very misunderstood. They are not the devil. And people getting regular blood work can see that. But this is probably something that annoys me. People in the UK, right, are a bunch of liars when it comes to their blood work. Nobody does it as often as they say that they do. They just say it because they think that that's the right thing. You get your bloods done. Oh, yeah, here's my bloods. It's like, can I see the one before that? And it's like non-existent, because in the 5 years they've been taking PDs, they've done one set of bloods just to say like, oh, I've done my bloods. That was okay. And then they'll just look at that piece of paper every time they blast the cycle and go, that must be how I'm feeling now.
You're definitely right there. With blood work, I think people don't appreciate how often you do have to get blood work checked to really to manage a cycle, particularly if you're going to, if you stay on the same cycle for ages, doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to stay just as benign. Like there is an issue there with like the time on cycle, even on the same cycle. And if you make adjustments to your cycle, well then there's absolutely going to be changes to your blood work. People view blood work as like they attach it to like, okay, they write on their blood work, this was 500 tests, 300 primo, so that's just that every time I take that call. And it's like, well no, that was like March 14th at 7 a.m. when you were doing this. And it's like, take your bloods the next day, take your bloods the day after, there'll still be some changes in values. Take your bloods in a month, there'll definitely be some changes. I don't think people appreciate that they're a slice. Or you still see people going for blood work clinics which have awful testing, particularly in relation to estrogen, and just not having an estrogen sensitive test at all.
Yeah, and people crushing their estrogen because it's sky high when they're using tren, not understanding that it's the tren.
It's the tren, yeah.
So then they feel like crap, and they're getting even more emotional. They're getting even more mood swings and aggressive outbursts, thinking it's the trend. It's like, well, now you're at zero estrogen again. Fun place to be.
Oh, fucking hell. All right. I got a dash, so we better wrap this up here if that's okay, mate. I appreciate you coming on. I'm sorry to cut things off. But most importantly, where can people find you? Where can they reach out to you, promote all your stuff?
So my Instagram is Luke Oliver Harris. I'm posting basically informative content specifically about performance enhancing drugs, mitigating sort of the negative implications on health to do with it, and just trying to be a sort of trustworthy source of good quality information. So yeah, you can check it out if you want. I don't know. I said at the start, right, I'm quite introverted, so I don't need 1 million followers. If you're interested, you have a look. If not, I just hope you have a good day.
All right.
And double the dose.
Double the dose. On that note, we'll leave you all there. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Links will be in the description. See ya.